Nippon Airways, also known as ANA, doesn't make careless decisions. Every aircraft order is calculated down to the last yen. So, when ANA shocked the world in 2016 by buying exactly 3 Airbus A380s, the industry was baffled. Not 30, not 13, just 3. The numbers didn't add up, the economics were a nightmare. But this wasn't about efficiency. Behind the smiling Honu was a story of a desperate attempt to keep a US airline from breaking into one of Japan's most profitable routes. So, let's get into it. To understand what happened, we need to go back to January 2016. ANA drops its bombshell, 3 Airbus A380s, confirmed. Think about what this meant operationally. Separate pilot training programs for just 3 aircraft. Type ratings that cost hundreds of thousands per pilot, dedicated ground equipment sitting idle most of the time, specialized maintenance teams learning procedures for a tiny subfleet. The numbers were staggering. ANA would need to train dozens of pilots on the A380. Each pilot requires weeks of simulator time, ground school, and line training. For 3 aircraft, that's millions in training costs with minimal utilization. Ground support equipment tells the same story. A380s need specialized pushback tugs, baggage loaders, and passenger boarding bridges. The equipment costs millions and sits unused when the aircraft aren't operating. Every MBA program teaches economies of scale. ANA's A380 order was a masterclass in how to avoid them. Industry veterans started asking the obvious question: what was ANA really buying? But here's what made it stranger. These weren't going to London or New York like every other A380 operator. They were headed to Hawaii. One route, one destination. The entire business case hanging on Japanese families wanting to vacation in Honolulu. And ANA wasn't just painting them corporate white, it was creating something that would break aviation marketing forever. Meet the Flying Honu. Blue livery representing Hawaiian skies, emerald green for crystal ocean water, orange for famous Hawaiian sunsets. Each aircraft painted as a massive smiling sea turtle with smaller turtles swimming along the fuselage. The attention to detail was incredible. Each turtle had individual characteristics. The paint job took weeks longer than standard liveries. The cost was astronomical compared to normal aircraft painting. These weren't transport aircraft anymore. They were social media sensations with wings. But the cute turtle marketing masked a deeper strategy game, because ANA's real motivation had nothing to do with Hawaii and everything to do with a major airline bankruptcy that threatened to reshape Japanese aviation forever. Rewind to 2011, Skymark Airlines, Japan's ambitious third-largest carrier, makes one of aviation's most audacious orders: 4 Airbus A380s for a low-cost carrier operating primarily domestic routes. Industry experts were baffled. Using A380s for domestic Japanese flights? That was like using cruise ships for lake crossings. The infrastructure alone would be impossible. Some Japanese domestic airports couldn't handle A380s. The gates were too small. The runways at secondary cities couldn't support the weight. But Skymark's CEO, Shinichi Nishikubo, had bigger dreams. Premium international transformation, routes to major European and American cities. The A380s would be the centerpiece of this complete airline makeover. 6 months later, Skymark expanded its order to 6 aircraft. The CEO called the A380 remarkable and his competitive advantage. The financial commitment was staggering. 6 A380s at list price meant over $2.4 billion in aircraft alone, for an airline that had never operated internationally and struggled to fill domestic flights consistently. Within 3 years, reality started biting back. April 2014, Airbus completes the first flight test of Skymark's initial A380. Everything looked on track for delivery later that year. The aircraft was painted in Skymark's livery, ready for final customer acceptance flights. Then the numbers hit. Skymark's premium strategy was failing. Revenue plummeted as passengers rejected higher fares. They couldn't afford payments for A330s that had already received, let alone 6 A380s costing over $400 million each. The airline was burning cash at an unsustainable rate. July 2014, Airbus cancels Skymark's entire A380 order due to concerns over the airline's ability to pay for the aircraft. January 2015, Skymark files for bankruptcy protection with massive debts. Suddenly, Airbus had a massive problem. 2 A380s were already built or nearly completed for Skymark. The aircraft were painted, configured, and ready for delivery. Finding new buyers for these giants virtually impossible. The A380 market was already struggling with limited demand. Those aircraft ended up with Emirates. But something else was happening behind the scenes, something that would drag ANA into this mess and create one of aviation's strangest fleet decisions. Now, here's where corporate strategy gets fascinating. ANA wasn't really interested in A380s. It had built its long-haul network around Boeing 777s and 787s, flexible, efficient aircraft that could serve multiple routes profitably. They were interested in preventing Delta Airlines from acquiring Skymark and gaining access to Japanese domestic routes. The bankruptcy court was preparing to sell Skymark's assets. Delta was circling with serious intent. Delta's primary interest was securing access at Tokyo Narita to funnel US-Asia traffic through Tokyo, a move that would have fundamentally altered the competitive landscape for trans-Pacific travel. If successful, Delta would have cracked Japan's protected domestic market for the first time in decades. ANA and JAL had spent decades building their domestic duopoly. Japanese domestic routes generate massive profit, some of the highest yield routes in global aviation. Business travelers pay premium fares for frequent service between major cities. Losing even a portion of this market to Delta would cost billions in annual revenue. The ripple effects would be devastating for both Japanese carriers. ANA couldn't let that happen. Japanese domestic routes generate billions in annual revenue. Losing that to a US competitor, it was unthinkable for Japan's aviation industry. So, ANA made a deal. It acquired a stake in Skymark to influence its restructuring and keep Delta out of Japanese domestic aviation permanently. Airbus had its own agenda. The manufacturer needed someone to solve its A380 problem urgently. By 2016, the A380 program was under severe pressure as cancellations mounted, damaging Airbus's reputation and threatening the aircraft's future viability. The program had already lost orders from other major carriers, including Virgin Atlantic. Airbus executives were facing difficult questions from shareholders about the A380's commercial viability. Every cancelled order made the program's economics worse. The fixed development costs had to be spread across fewer aircraft deliveries. The three-way negotiation was brilliant. ANA got its stake in Skymark and blocked Delta's Japanese expansion permanently. Airbus secured a new customer to offset the Skymark disaster and keep some of the A380 orders. Delta got shut out completely from its Japanese domestic ambitions. While the A380s carried a list price of around $400 million each, Airbus likely offered ANA substantial discounts or compensation packages to secure the deal. The aircraft order was essentially a side payment to make the larger strategic arrangement work for all parties involved. It was never about operational efficiency, it was about corporate competition at the highest level, with aircraft orders as bargaining chips in a much larger game. But here's where ANA's genius really showed. Instead of treating these A380s as unwanted baggage forced upon them by corporate policies, the airline turned them into marketing masterpieces. The Hawaii route made perfect sense strategically as Japan's single most popular leisure destination. Before the pandemic, over 1.5 million Japanese travelers had visited Hawaii annually. The market dynamics were perfect for the A380. High-yield leisure travelers willing to pay extra for unique experiences. Sufficient demand to fill 520 seats on ANA's A380s consistently. But ANA went far beyond basic route planning. The Flying Honu concept amplified everything about the Hawaii experience. Rainbow mood lighting inspired by Hawaii's nickname as the Rainbow State, special amenity kits exclusive to A380 flights featuring Hawaiian-themed products, premium dining programs with dishes created by celebrity chefs, Hawaiian-themed entertainment systems with exclusive content about island culture. The cabin configuration was specifically designed for Japanese family travel, premium economy selections with extra space for multi-generational groups, family-friendly layouts in economy class, special children's areas, and amenities throughout the aircraft. This wasn't transportation anymore, it was an experience that started the moment passengers boarded at Narita Airport. Japanese families started planning entire vacations around flying the Flying Honu, often paying hundreds of dollars extra just for the aircraft experience. ANA transformed an operational nightmare into a unique selling proposition that no competitor could replicate, no matter how much money they spent on conventional marketing. Meanwhile, Japan Airlines took the complete opposite approach. It rejected the A380 entirely after careful analysis, called it impractical for Japan's market structure and geographic realities. Instead, the carrier focused on frequency and flexibility, with 787 Dreamliners on international routes. JAL's logic was bulletproof from an operational perspective. Japan's geography favors point-to-point connections over hub-and-spoke operations. The 787 could serve secondary cities with non-stop international flights while maintaining economic efficiency. Smaller aircraft meant more frequency options and better schedule convenience for business travelers. JAL optimized for operational efficiency and network flexibility. ANA optimized for market dominance and brand differentiation while solving political problems. Post-COVID, JAL's 787 strategy proved operationally superior and more resilient to demand shocks, though ANA's branding success with the Flying Honu remained strong throughout the crisis. The contrast highlighted two completely different philosophies of airline management and strategic thinking. Despite marketing success that exceeded all expectations, the operational challenges were exactly what critics predicted from day one. The A380s could only serve one route profitably. If Hawaii demand dropped for any reason, economic recession, natural disasters, travel restrictions, there was nowhere to redeploy them economically. They were too large for most other routes from Tokyo and too specialized in their configurations for different markets. The aircraft were essentially stranded assets, unlike ANA's 777s and 787s, which could shift between Asian routes, European services, or even cargo operations. The A380s had no operational flexibility whatsoever. When COVID hit in 2020, this inflexibility became painfully obvious and financially devastating. While ANA's 787s and 777s shifted to cargo operations or different routes as passenger demand collapsed globally, the A380 sat grounded for months at enormous parking costs. The pandemic exposed the A380's fundamental vulnerabilities. Most aircrafts worldwide began retiring their A380 fleets permanently, viewing them as obsolete in a world of reduced travel demand and social distancing requirements. Lufthansa retired some of theirs early. Air France accelerated retirement plans that were devised before the pandemic. ANA persisted with the Flying Honu despite these operational challenges, but at significant financial cost. Insurance, maintenance, and parking fees continued even when the aircraft weren't flying. Recovery was slower than other aircraft types throughout 2021 and 2022. Industry observers questioned whether ANA would eventually retire or consolidate the A380 fleet, as its long-term strategic value remains unclear in a post-pandemic aviation environment focused on efficiency over size. The operational metrics tell a sobering story. Utilization rates below industry averages, limited route flexibility that constrains revenue opportunities. But here's what makes this story fascinating from a strategic perspective that goes beyond simple operational accounting. ANA's A380 order reveals something crucial about how major airlines really operate in the modern aviation industry. Textbooks say fleet decisions should be based on route analysis, passenger demand forecasting, and operational efficiency calculations. Pure, rational economic thinking applied to aircraft selection and network planning. ANA, well, they prove that that's only half the equation in real-world airline management. Real airline decisions involve corporate politics, market positioning, competitor blocking strategies, brand differentiation, and strategic partnerships that extend far beyond simple route economics. The aviation industry operates like a complex ecosystem where aircraft orders become diplomatic tools, fleet decisions signal strategic intent, and operational efficiency sometimes takes a backseat to larger competitive considerations. From a marketing perspective, the Flying Honu succeeded spectacularly beyond anyone's expectations. The Flying Turtle liveries became social media sensations with millions of shares and posts. Aviation enthusiasts plan trips specifically to fly them, creating a cult following. Hawaiian tourism authorities embrace them as marketing partners, featuring them in official tourism campaigns. The brand value generated is impossible to quantify precisely, but it's clearly worth tens of millions in equivalent advertising spend. ANA created something that transcends typical airline marketing, an emotional connection with customers that generate loyalty and premium pricing power. From operational metrics alone, the critics were absolutely right. Expensive to maintain relative to utilization rates, impossible to redeploy flexibly when market conditions change, limited to essentially one profitable route with no backup options. It's the perfect case study in how marketing success and operational efficiency don't always align in complex businesses like airlines, where multiple strategic objectives compete for priority. The lesson extends beyond aviation to any industry where companies must balance short-term operational efficiency with long-term strategic positioning. Let's examine the actual numbers behind ANA's decision, because they tell a compelling story about strategic thinking versus pure financial optimization. The direct costs were substantial: pilot training programs costing millions, ground equipment investments, gate modifications, specialized maintenance facilities. Total upfront investment was likely around $1 billion when all associated costs were included. But the strategic benefits were massive and ongoing. Blocking Delta from Japanese domestic routes, that protected billions alone in annual revenue. The Hawaii route generated premium pricing that more than covered the A380's higher operating costs. Brand value creation that enhanced ANA's position across their entire network. The financial calculation becomes even more interesting when viewed over a 20-year time horizon. The competitive protection alone justified the aircraft purchase price. Everything else, marketing benefits, route profitability, brand enhancement, was essentially bonus value. This type of strategic thinking is common in other industries, but rarely discussed openly in aviation, where operational efficiency dominates most public analysis. For Airbus, the order provided crucial credibility at a time when the A380 program was struggling with cancellations and delivery delays. It proved that airlines were still willing to order the giant, even in small quantities, for specialized purposes. For Boeing, ANA's decision highlighted gaps in their product lineup. The 787-8 was outdated for most applications. The 777X was still years away from delivery. Airbus had successfully filled a niche that Boeing couldn't access with existing products. The competitive dynamics between aircraft manufacturers became more complex as orders increasingly reflected strategic configurations beyond operational requirements. For other Asian carriers, ANA's approach demonstrated alternative ways to think about fleet strategy. The industry learned that aircraft orders could serve multiple strategic purposes simultaneously, even when the operational case appeared questionable. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next. So, why not check it out?